Hi, Abby. Thank you very much. So, as Abby was mentioning, what we're here to talk about today is e-commerce, and in particular, what we can do to improve online sales figures. So e-commerce is something that has been coming up more and more as we're talking with different clients, going to different conferences, and so we want to sort of sit down and investigate, what as market researchers we can do to improve ultimately sales and presence online. So what we have seen when we kind of look at the landscape around us is that online retail is growing rapidly and becoming a much bigger part of retail in general. So if we look at Europe in particular, online retailers are expanding actually at a rate of 14 times faster than traditional, just the conventional sort of physical outlets. And this is becoming especially a lot bigger in mature markets. So if you look at something like the UK or like the US, you're seeing that domestic retailing, about 10% of it is actually made up of online sales and a little bit less in mid-range markets. So if you just kind of look at that percentage and say, okay, maybe 10%, it's not really that big yet, so maybe we don't need to start paying attention to it as much. But when you consider the rapid growth that we're seeing and what that figure used to look like a few years back, it becomes much more important. And so that's why we're just starting to see this as becoming a bigger conversation and a bigger topic, both at the agency side and at the client side. So what this means is that it's becoming critical and absolutely vital to adapt and to start looking at these different sales environments. So in the years past, in the past few decades, what we could do and what we did was we would always look at physical, sort of what we call real stores. So these are, an actual physical environment where a shopper is going into a store and looking and maybe picking up the products, holding them. And what you could do is from that point, we might segment and say, okay, we'll look at grocery stores or we'll look at hypermarkets, things like that. But ultimately, it was always focusing on this physical in-store optimization of your presence. But now, with this growth of e-commerce, it's not just looking at physical stores anymore. And so it becomes vital to look at how we, as a retailer and as a manufacturer, our presence is on e-commerce for desktops, but also as well as on mobile devices. Because as we all know, it's not just that somebody's sitting in front of their desktop looking at one product or one shopping environment, but actually they could be sitting on a couch in front of their TV, see a commercial, pull out their phone and start shopping for it. Or they could, in certain situations, actually be in, say, a Tesco or a Walmart, see a product, pull out their Amazon app and start shopping on there. So it's becoming important to consider all of these different shopping environments when trying to optimize our presence. And if you just start digging into then e-commerce in particular, as I mentioned before, it's not just people sitting on their desktops or on their PCs, but if we look back over the, say, the last 5 years, which is what you see in front of you now, it used to be that almost all of the traffic, about 90% of the traffic, was driven by desktop retail. But just in the past year is actually the first time that mobile retail has actually surpassed it now. So if you're looking at that now, it's the blue line going up. So for the past few years, we're kind of slowly shrinking that gap. But as smartphones have become much more prevalent, as tablets have, obviously the introduction of the iPad and now the Surface, as all of these things are becoming more popular and more prevalent, mobile and all of the different challenges and also opportunities that exist with mobile are now becoming just as important, if not now even more important than just looking at regular e-commerce. So the ultimate question and what we're here to talk about today is, can consumers, can shoppers find your products and brands online? This has always been the question of can they find you has always been a question for physical, and so a lot of times it was, okay, well, we know we're going to be on this shelf with these few competitors, so we just need to make sure that in regards to that they can find us, that we stand out, and that we have a desirable offering to them. But now with this introduction of online e-commerce and mobile e-commerce in particular, there's a lot more challenges that come into play. So over the past couple of years now, we have set out to really start to investigate this idea of e-commerce, and we've been kind of helping a lot of our clients to replicate online retail environments, and we'll give an example of this in the next couple of slides. But if we look at things like we have Spotify, Dropbox, UPC, these are ones where it's across industry, it's across different countries and different areas where this is always becoming more prevalent. So it's not just that this is relevant for one target, consumer or one group, but it's relevant across everybody now. This is just to give an example. Some of the ones that we worked with to kind of replicate online retail environments to understand how people shop when they are online. And so what we'll do now is just give a quick example of what this could look like. So for those of you who are not familiar with Zooplus, this is it's a pet supply store here in Europe, and what you see in front of you is actually a way that we can mimic their website. So the real Zooplus website also has a lot of stuff sort of on the outside, but we can kind of strip away and start to look at just the main core things that are there. And similar to what you do if you run, say, a typical pricing or portfolio analysis or something like that, where you're putting in a different group of products, a different group of prices, we can also do that here in an online environment. But what makes it really nice and really interesting is there's a lot of different layers that you can put into it now. So what you see in front of you now is kind of the traditional shopping environment where they're starting to scroll through a bunch of different products. But you can also then say you really like this one product, you can click into it, read more about it, see what the prices look like, what the reviews look like, and then ultimately, as we have sort of circled at the bottom here, this is where you can make your purchase decision. And by doing this, we're now getting much closer to reality. I mean, obviously, if you work and create a sort of online environment of a physical store, then you're asking consumers to kind of shop online as they would physically, which it can get us pretty close, but obviously it's not exactly perfect. But now we're actually able to mimic online stores and ask people to pretend shop online as they would actually online. So we're getting to a lot more of a realistic scenario now, which can lead to a lot better and more realistic results as well. And then just to give a couple quick examples of questions that can be answered through this type of research. So you see something like product ratings, or the rankings of how they come up, and one of the things that John will touch on a little bit later is how the reviews play into the price of what you can go into, as well as also the ranking, so where you are in terms of the order that you're shown, the importance of that, especially online. But you can also start to play around with what effect pricing and promotion has, what type of effect the imagery has. So obviously it's not necessarily that you're just showing the packaging now, but maybe there's some examples, or in this example here, you could do product call-outs and things like that. But also, because you now have this online retail environment, you can also start to play around with product description, sizes, naming, things like that. So these are all just some examples of questions that through this e-commerce research now we can address and we can answer. But so what I'll do now is pass it along to John, who will take you through, as we talked about before, the 5 tips that we have from our research about e-commerce.
Thank you very much, Scott. So now we'll go into our 5 learnings. We actually collected these through a meta-analysis we did across some of the e-commerce studies that we did with different clients. And we'll talk about, in these 5 learnings, we'll talk about the importance of your position in search order, also talk about how this importance differ between mobile and desktop. We'll also touch upon how sorting can change your competitive environment, some ideas to make more impact with your imagery and iconography, and finally, as Scott just mentioned, how reviews can impact your pricing power. Okay, so before we go into our first learning, I would just like to highlight some findings from a study published by Google. They actually found out that being on top of search results is still being clicked most often. So just being on top means you get clicked more often. However, this behavior is slightly less than it was in 2005. Also for the items that are immediately after the first, especially second to fourth, they are now being clicked more often than they were in 2005, which brings them closer to importance as being number one in the search findings. Another important finding is that people review more items than they did before. However, they do that in about the same total time, which means they spend less time per search entry or search finding, and thus the importance of standing out among these search results becomes even more critical now. All right, so how does this translate into purchase likelihood when it comes to buying online with your normal desktop computer? So we do indeed see from our research is that after you ignore all the product effects, we found out that the first item in the list has about 50% more likely to be bought as compared to items number 5, for example, and around twice as much as item number 10. So being on top of the search results does indeed have a strong advantage, not only in search results of Google, but also in terms of purchase potential. And again, this is after excluding all the product effects. So disregarding everything, a product that's being shown on top of the search results will always have an advantage, which we see here in the chart very clearly. So that was in desktop. We also see that if the purchase is happening on a mobile device, the importance of being the first item is even more pronounced. So by mobile device here, we mean both smartphones and tablets like the iPad. We see that the purchase likelihood to buy the top item almost doubles when a consumer buys on a mobile device. It also drops more quickly after the first item on mobile, unlike that nice flat piece we have here in the beginning of the blue line for desktop. And this is quite essential for the additional points we'll talk about next. The way buyers use smartphones with fast swiping and the small screen is quite different from using a PC with a mouse and a big screen. This means that with the current rise in mobile shopping, and as Scott was just saying, it's actually exceeding desktop shopping, it's critical to think about how your products are searched for, sorted, and looked at in mobile versus desktop, because the habits are quite different. All right, now we'll come to our third learning. I will get to explaining the chart in a minute, but first I want to highlight a certain idea. We know from all our researches that consumer choices are always dependent on the competitive set within which they are chosen, sometimes even more so than the actual product characteristics. In many cases, it's how you compare against competition rather than how you are yourself. And consumers always feel satisfied when they feel they made the right choice. And of course, for that choice to happen, a competitive set must be involved. If you have both products, if you have products both offline and in online channels, you know that the competitive set in offline usually stays pretty much similar across different retailers of similar size. So what does this mean to us here? So for our learning here about sorting, let's say a consumer goes to an online retailer and they sort by price or by ratings, or they filter by certain features. This activity of sorting or filtering introduces a new competitive set to the consumer. Also, with each of those clicks, the products displayed just around your own product are different. They are of different prices, they are different description, different ratings, which may make your product look better or worse in comparison. So we already established that being the first item in the list gets a strong advantage, or in e-commerce speak, we call it a strong lift. And the chart here is based on a study we did to understand the impact of sorting and filtering on choice. When you go to an online retailer store, you're usually presented with a bestseller sorting or recommended sorting by default. And just using this type of sorting that's usually by default on the websites, the first product had an average 18% chance of being chosen, as you see in the left side of the chart in the blue box. Products 2 to 5 had a total of 40% chance of being chosen. Now, looking at the other two columns, after the user sorts either by price or by ratings, the picture looks quite different. So the products have a different arrangement and thus appear differently in the context of their environment. So after the user have made an action, as in clicked, sort by price or ratings, we see that the chance that the first product is chosen is increased either by 1.5 or 2 times as compared to the default sorting by the website. And we also randomize the product prices and ratings. So this indeed is just a pure effect of being the first item on the list. It's not because it's the cheapest or the highest rated, because everything was randomized and this was repeated several times. And we also see different dynamics for the products ranked after the first. So, for example, by price, you still see that products 2 to 4 or 2 to 5 have a strong chance of being chosen, while once the respondent or the user sorts by rating, then you see that the first item has a high chance of being chosen. However, items after that are not as much. It's more of an even distribution here. So this really confirms that the decision-making follows different patterns and different behavior as the competitive environment changes, and the user does some action to refine that environment. It's very important to know that when the user does some action, it's immediately more likely that they will make a choice that depends on that action because he spent an effort to do this. All right. So going further for our forced learning, remember earlier we mentioned that consumers now spend less time looking at each item, and that especially mobile with the fast vertical scrolling, you really need to be catchy enough to grab the consumer's attention. So let's look at an ice cream example here. In the store, an ice cream container is the same everywhere. You can, of course, make a lot of design tricks to grab attention, but sometimes it's just best to show the people's ice cream itself because it looks delicious. That's not really possible in a supermarket, but in an online store, you definitely can. Nobody says you cannot take a picture of an open box. Also, any claims or specific features like fresh cream we have here can be displayed separately. You don't have to take a picture of the pack and the claim on it in a small font. You can put that separately outside. There's a lot of room for creativity in online product imagery to convey certain selling points or key features for your own target customers. So you don't just have to take a picture of it like it is in the supermarket. You can be a lot more creative. You can put an image on the website. Nothing says that this image has to be exactly the same as it is in the normal offline supermarket. All right, so now we're going to our final learning. It's actually my favorite learning of the day. We found out that good reviews do allow you to charge a higher price, which means they give you higher price power while maintaining your market share. So in one example, when we're looking at a 10-point scoring system, let's say a product have a certain market share, let's say 10%, as their rating score increases, as consumer reviews are becoming better and better, we actually see that the product can charge a higher price while maintaining their market share. Of course, these exact figures will differ per category, but we see on average a trend of that you can demand 5 to 10% more price as you get one more solid point in your ranking score, on your rating score. So this is quite important. Of course, changing reviews or getting a higher rating score is not something very easy. However, compared to a lot of other things, if you're listing your product on an e-commerce retailer, you do not actually have that much control over a lot of aspects of the design of that retailer. You do not have a lot of choice as to what other products are there or how the sorting is being made. However, you do have some sort of an impact on how the consumers like your products based on how good your product actually is and how good you connect with your customers. So to aim for better customer experience, because from all the different variables we tested, we see that this is the strongest driver for a higher price power. Right. So to summarize, search position still matters in the desktop, and it's almost twice as important in mobile. Sorting can really change your competitive environment dramatically and thus potentially change your market share. So keep track of where you stand with different sorting options in the retailers you're partnering with. We also touched on how you can use some creativity to make your images stand out. And finally, how high reviews can give you more pricing power. With every point increase, we can see a potential price increase of about 5 to 10% while maintaining your current market position. So thank you very much for your time. Now we'll go address some questions, but also feel free to get in touch with Scott or myself if you'd like to have a more in-depth discussion about these findings.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, so we're going to take some questions now. If you haven't asked your question yet, please feel free to go ahead and fill it in. I've got one right here. The first question is, which industries does this apply to? I mean, I see here in the attendee list we've got some some different guests from different industries, not only CPG but maybe also in services. Where do you guys see this applying?
John, I'll take this one. I mean, I think ultimately this can apply across any industry as long as it's maybe for a manufacturer who doesn't control their own online retail environment. So obviously, if you're selling these like your own products on your own websites, then you have the ability to kind of go in and do A/B testing and start to play around with the dynamics of your environment because you control it. But if you're selling on a third-party retail, so say you're selling on Amazon.com or any other online shopping environment where you don't have that control, then this becomes a very good way to try to understand the dynamics of that market, because a lot of times those online retailers, kind of like you would with the physical retailer, they might not be willing to provide full access to all of their data right away, and so this is a way to kind of get to understanding of how consumers shop online if you don't control that environment yourself. So it really can apply kind of across industry. I think the main thing is it's most relevant if you don't have control of that environment and you're not selling it on your own websites.
Okay, great. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. So now we have one more question. Reviews are out of my control. So how can this help me? Knowing this about the ranking, I guess.
Okay, so we did mention that high reviews do demand high price power, and I do agree that reviews are, technically speaking, out of your control. You cannot just put reviews. However, I mean, you are in control of the product, and the reviews are a reflection of the consumer's experience of your product. So in a way, that you do actually have control over the reviews by making sure you have the right connection with your consumers. However, also, one of the additional problems we see with some of our clients is that it's not only that they have good reviews or bad reviews, it's more sometimes you do not have reviews at all. And not having reviews at all, we see, is actually sometimes a lot worse than having bad reviews, because it can imply that you do not have good popularity or you do not have good customer base. That can be a factor that makes some customers hold back. And you don't, of course, want that. So one of the things we always advise our clients about is to make sure you have a good connection with your customer base. Even if you do not have access directly to the online shopping environment, you have your Facebook, you have your consumer, your CRM lists, you have different ways of connecting with your customers, and encouraging them to put reviews is actually the first critical point, because in many cases consumers just don't want to put reviews or are too lazy, and encouraging them to do so can be very effective, because in many cases your happy customers, they do not have anything to call the product, it's all good. They don't really think about putting a review, but if you have a good database of your customers and make sure you're connecting with them, once you know they have ordered something, you send them a note, okay, you ordered this, can you put some review? This is a great first step. So making sure your first set of reviews is very good. Beyond that, it's really about addressing the problems that you see in the reviews if you have some negative numbers. So I do agree it's not entirely in your control, but as a client, you would be the only one who is actually able to do something about it.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer. All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. If you still would like to contact us, like John said, please feel free to reach out to either John or Scott, or you can even connect with us online through the website or social media for the links you see there. Actually, I've got one more question if you guys have a second. So these 5 tips are based on research outcomes. Mm-hmm. What do you expect for the future of online shopping? Any kind of trends that are coming?
Well, more mobile, but that's kind of obvious. Mm. More mobile, more speed, more catchy images, and we also see a lot more in subscriptions. So even in traditional consumer goods, say shampoo or soap or whatever, even diapers, we see a lot of trends now of online retailers going into subscription models. So basically, and this kind of limits a bit the impact, the potential for brand switching, and that's something you have to keep into account, because once the consumer is comfortable with the subscription, they don't think again about choosing a brand. They don't go through the purchase cycle every time things just get delivered to the house. That's a pattern we see a lot, starting a lot in the US, and it's also starting to come here in Europe too. These are really the top trends I have in mind. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think he's right. I mean, if I look at, so I'm in London now, but I'm originally from the U.S. And when I look at how my parents, who are the most old school people in the world, they don't do any personal care shopping anymore. It's all subscription based off of Amazon. If I asked them what type of personal care products they shop for, they would just kind of stare at me. They have no idea because it just shows up at their house. But I think one of the other things that will come into play now is a little bit more need for transparency, because what happens now is the physical and the online shopping environments are blending together. I mean, there's this whole idea of showrooming, where you come into a physical store, you look at the products, and then you go and buy it online somewhere else. It's becoming much more common now that somebody might be standing in a Tesco, see a product, scan it on their Amazon app, see that it's cheaper on Amazon, and buy it through there while standing in Tesco. So it's actually the online and physical are blending a lot more, and so I think you're going to see a much stronger presence and probably more rapid growth actually of e-commerce as the physical retailers are kind of struggling to catch up a little bit.
Great. Thank you, guys. I hope that also answered your question. All right, we're going to go ahead and close things up. If you still have any burning questions, like I was just saying, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you all for joining today. We'll send around the slides and a recording of the session. You'll receive that from me tomorrow. But there's also a new feature here on GoToWebinar with handouts, and I've added a handout already, a PDF of the slides, so you can go ahead and download that now before you leave the session. Also visit skimgroup.com/webinars to sign up for updates on our monthly webinars. We'll be taking a break for July and August, but we'll have new sessions coming out right after that. So you'll want to sign up so we can inform you about those. So on behalf of Scott, John, and myself, I thank you all once again, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a great day.